reason for our session this evening is really to sort of support people who are not necessarily navigating and going through the challenges of supporting someone who's being diagnosed with vitiligo, but really to look at relationships. And this is coming from a place of a case study. I wasn't going to use that word, as I discussed with Andrew earlier in our conversation. But it is actually a real case situation with a family, a young family who've got a child of 5 years old who's been diagnosed with vitiligo. And it's about how couples cope, how families cope when they are faced with such challenges. So the Vitiligo Society kindly put myself and Andrew in touch. Natalie's done a really short intro of myself, so I'm not going to reintroduce myself, but I would like to introduce Andrew, and I think it'd be lovely if he introduces himself. So Andrew, would you like to fire away?
Hi, thanks, Joti. Yeah, I'm Andrew Thompson. I'm a long-time supporter of the Vitiligo Society. I've been on the research board for quite a few years now, I think over 10 years. And I'm a clinical psychologist by background, and started looking to support people with vitiligo alongside doing research back in 1998, and I've done a few studies since then. Until recently, I was a trustee at Changing Faces, which is a charity that I'll probably mention as we go along this evening, who work closely with the Vitiligo Society. And I guess the thing we wanted to focus on tonight is the wider sort of ripple effect that vitiligo can have. Doesn't always have, of course, but it can have. It's not rocket science. You don't need to be a psychologist, and you guys will have better experience than me, many of the people on the call, about the effects that it can have on family life, relationships, and relationships between parents and children, and children and their wider family. So we wanted to give a real sort of anonymized example of those sorts of things, and then just sort of talk through between ourselves a little bit about some tips really for beginning to manage that. But we also wanted to allow some time towards the end of the session for you to ask questions, and we'll finish with a slide which Natalie said that you'll make available for the people on the call, with some common sense sort of pointers on, but more importantly with some links to resources both in the society and with other charities that you can then follow up if you're interested in finding out more and getting some additional support.
Thank you, Andrew. So one of the things that we were really looking at with this particular situation that's occurred within this family is they found out recently within the last 6 months that their son has vitiligo. He's only a toddler. But this has brought immense stress between the couple. So initially, when they found out about the diagnosis, they didn't really know how to communicate with each other. There were periods of silence. There was periods of anxiety and worry. They wanted to support each other, but they didn't know how. They wanted to be able to provide emotional, physical support, but they didn't know how. They wanted to use comforting words, but they didn't know how. And I think what, ultimately has kind of happened is that they ended up keeping this within themselves. They needed time to digest the news about their son. But ultimately, I think they were also in shock. And as with any diagnosis, sometimes, that sudden shock element takes time to understand what it is, then to actually process it, and then to come to the realization that this is what it is. So they are going through that whole process now. And the reason why I wanted to explore this a bit further is because there tends to be so much focus on the patient, on the person who has vitiligo. But what about the parents? Now, when I think back at my situation when I was 21, I would have loved to know how my parents were dealing with this. I would have loved to know how my mum was reaching out to support, who she was talking to, who my dad had for support, how they were coping with this situation. And therefore, Andrew and I really hope to delve into this a bit further, so that if any of you on this call today are wondering, right, we are in this situation, we struggle with communicating our real feelings, we don't know how to express ourselves when we're really low, we don't know how to overcome our sadness, or maybe, you know, how to support our partners in a more positive way, in a better way, in a way that's going to help them and support them and guide them. And so this is the reason why we really want to get to the root of how we can do this. So with this particular family, Andrew, we know that initially they were sort of struggling to talk to one another because they were afraid of creating more worry, more anxiety. They were trying to process what was going on in their heads, and they weren't really communicating much with each other. In the very first instance of a family that have had this shocking news of a child or a loved one going through this, how and what would you suggest to the families involved during the very initial stages of support or guidance during those initial stages? What would you suggest that they do?
I guess there isn't one size that fits all. Just before we get into it, just out of interest, I don't know if people have seen the reaction buttons at the bottom. If we've got any parents with us tonight, if you want to click sort of raise your hand, so you could just, if you feel, only if you feel comfortable in sharing, and keep your hands raised if parenting is super easy.
This is great because it really does give us an idea of what families are going through. So this is
okay. So I can see a few parents, amongst us. Keep your hand up if you think parenting is super easy. I'm guessing that most people are going to drop their hands because, of course, the thing is that parenting is generally quite difficult from time to time, and of course, it's not. You know, if your child develops any sort of illness, whether it be acute illness or a long-term condition, that it's really stressful for a parent. I mean, it's fairly obvious, isn't it? It's stressful for the wider family, for grandparents, and so on. So it's really important to normalize that. When we're stressed, the body's normal reaction is to sort of go into a flight or fight type response, and we become very much focused on what's in front of us and causing us the stress. And actually, our vision and our thoughts often narrow down onto that. So in this case, it's not unusual for families to have a shared sense of being overwhelmed by the vitiligo, particularly if they don't know anything about the condition, if it's not already well known in the family. Which for some families it can be. There can be a lot of vitiligo expertise because there is obviously a genetic component to the condition. So some families may come with, within their family history, a good understanding of vitiligo and support, and be able to reach out to each other from the get-go. But for others, they won't, and it'll be a complete surprise, and there'll be a lot of uncertainty. What is this? We also know there's a lot of myths associated often with vitiligo as well. So parents can be worried about that. They can be worried about, I mean, part of the job of being a parent, of course, is to be thinking and preparing your child for their next step. You know, we're all brilliant teachers as parents. We're sort of like trying to be one step ahead of our child to guide them in the right direction. That does feed in to worrying. And of course, when we're stressed, that feeds into worrying. So we've got a sense of being overwhelmed, quite normal, the start of any unknown journey and condition. We've got normal reactions such as worrying and thinking about future scenarios. This can actually, if it goes on for a long period of time, be very unhelpful, because it can take you away from the everyday parenting and take you to a place where you're suffering yourself and experiencing distress. I think, Joti, the first step is to be easy on yourself and to normalize what's going on.
Yeah.
Think about how you would respond to a friend, a fellow parent whose child had developed any sort of condition or life event that had come along. You would be very compassionate towards them, likely. You would also want them and reassure them to take some time to get used to that new situation. And it does take time. And it's also, you know, parents often talk about a range of emotions. So there can be anxiety and associated with a worry about what's going to happen for the child, what's going to happen for you as a family. But there can also be guilt sometimes.
Yeah, and
It's
I
got
think
something
that's,
to do with me.
yeah,
There can also be anger. Why me? Why us?
these are the
And
feelings
there
that
can
came
also be low
about.
mood. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Andrew, these are the exact feelings that have arisen from this situation. Have they eaten something? Have they put themselves in a situation? Why has he got vitiligo at the age of 5? Why him? And the parents were trying to, really come to terms with this, and there was an incredible amount of guilt as well. So I think and I don't know whether that guilt will ever go away, because I do recall my dad once saying, is it something that I've eaten or something that I remember that vividly from my dad. I recall when my dad mentioned that to me, and now it's coming back. And I just think, gosh, parents, look, we're there to provide for our kids, to care for our kids, to look after for our children. We do worry about every single thing that they're doing. You naturally do as a parent. So then to have this added layer on top, it's going to cause even more worry. Is there going to appear to be children that are there going to be children unkind to each other, bullying? There's a lot of things that happen in schools these days. A lot of unkind behavior as well. Parents thinking ahead of what, ahead of the whole situation. And I think, like you said, we've got to sort of just normalize it first and take each day as it comes, because the vitiligo, there have been cases where for children or for adults, sometimes it's appeared and then it will just stay as it is and stay like that, stay sort of, dormant. So, you do have those types of things where those situations where it may not get worse. But I think as a parent, you tend to always think the worst. And I think that's what's happened in this situation here. And I think when it comes to worrying, I mean, there's always going to be that what if. We can't stop thinking as parents, what if? What happens if they're not going to get a job? They're going to get discriminated against. What happens if they're going to go to secondary school and get bullied? What happens if they end up working here? What happens if we're always sort of, I mean, I think that about my children now. I always think about the what ifs. And so I can't imagine what that's like with vitiligo on top of that.
I mean, we're programmed to do that. And I mean, I think the good news is, and hopefully there'll be people on the call with this experience, adjustment does come for most families, and support is available for those that do end up struggling to get to that point. But many, in fact, the majority of families will adjust. But that initial sort of what's going on here? Is it something to do with me? How do we deal with this? How's this going to affect their future prospects? Very, very normal. I think the first thing is, like we said, is to sort of try to get a bit of a helicopter view, step outside of yourself and acknowledge that is normal. It is what it is to be human, that when adverse things happen to those people we love, and we generally love our children very much, that is overwhelming. To begin to write down some of your concerns, because you can bet that other families and people in your situation are ahead of you, in, if like, previous generations will have had the same sorts of thoughts, to try and just capture some of those and to form lists of things that you might want to ask your healthcare professional, or you might want to ask other people that are further ahead in the journey, who you can often contact through the society. And we've just heard that really important word about being allies and building allies with people who understand other parents, that is in this case. And to begin to let it settle a little bit with yourself, and to check in with yourself about whether you might need any additional support. So there's a whole range of supports out there to help manage parenting stress, and we'll perhaps come on to that in a moment. It's also about taking the plunge to begin to talk about it as a couple, if you're in a relationship, or with other people in the family. For many people, that will be easy, comfortable to do. But for some people, it can be tricky. And for most people, you'll often find there'll be at least sometimes when that person close to you in the family is not in the same place as you. And again, it's about being sort of forgiving about that and trying to get the pace right. but taking the plunge to begin to talk about it is important. I mean, we could come on further to talk about how the parent refocuses away from the vitiligo back onto their child in a moment, but essentially that's the core sort of the core task, which is easier said than done. Like any threat
Yeah.
gets your attention,
It's
but
easier said than
yeah, yeah,
Sorry, Andy. I think
sorry.
it is easier said than done, but the word communication is the word that I want to use. I think once this couple started talking about this more, their views started to align in terms of what was going to be the next step. So they've decided to go down the nutrition point, the nutrition stages where they're going to start looking into what they're eating. They're working with a nutrition therapist as well to see if there are things or are there any allergies or things that are not suitable for his body, for his stomach, things that he's not digesting well. They're really kind of taking his nutrition to another level at this stage, because they said if they start working on this, then they're moving forwards in a way together to kind of really work out the core reason that this could be, why he has vitiligo. And so they did say that one of the things at the beginning was they didn't really know where to start, and I obviously guided them towards the Vitiligo Society to get in touch, to read up about people doing a different array of projects and reaching out and talking about vitiligo, and they have done that, but now they're kind of reading on the same page. They're able to kind of move forwards together. But they did say, had one of them said, no, this is not the route I want to take, I want to go down this homeopathic route, or I want to try some steroids, or I want to try an ointment, a treatment or something else, a steroid treatment or whatever, then the views might have differed there. And I think that's where obviously there might have been some differences. So communication again is incredibly important. Yeah.
Definitely. And I think communication with other people that have a similar experience, and also asking the sorts of questions that you want to ask, because often parents will have a whole range of questions about treatments, cures, types of product, what's available to support child at school,
Yeah. Yeah.
all of those sorts of things. It's important to once you've sort of got over that initial sort of worry type phase, and you've taken the plunge to reach out to other people, is I think to really begin to focus on the child. What we found with some of our research, and this is across a whole range of skin conditions, the children are really quite good at being in the present moment. So often children aren't as worried about the things that we're worried about as for their future. The 3-year-old isn't worried about what the job they're going to get. They aren't worried about the partner they're going to have, where they're going to live. They're in the moment, in the sandpit, literally. And one of the things as a parent, like I said, is preparing them for the future. But another really important job of the parent is being alongside your child. So we can actually learn a lot from our child and listening to the child. What are their actual current issues with vitiligo? There may be none. And the most important thing that you can do is make sure that you do spend time with them to help them develop as normal, to help build
Yeah.
their general personality, their general strengths, bring them out of their own shell, as you would with any other child in the family. And I know that sounds like really obvious, but because of the overwhelming nature of any long-term condition can have on us as parents, it's really important to sort of sometimes manually get that sort of shift back to being alongside your child, but not neglecting those worries you've got. I think there are some techniques that we often teach adults with who are worrying and are anxious, is to be able to catch those worries and ask whether, almost go into problem solving mode. Is this something I can solve a problem on now, or is it hypothetical? And then if it's hypothetical, to leave that, because after all, there's nothing that can be done about that at the present time. So worrying about a relationship that your 2-year-old might have in terms of meeting their life partner, not something you can do much about at the moment. It may be an issue in the future, but in the moment, what's important is that they're eating healthily, they're
Yeah.
that they're feeling contained and loved, and that they're having fun, and they're feeling
Yeah,
that they can play with you and come to you with their needs. So it
absolutely.
sounds obvious, but it's not easy to do when
Yeah,
your head's somewhere else in the future. So that's so important. And being forgiving of other people in the family that might happen, like I said, people are at different places at different times. So maybe allowing that space to come together to chat about it, but then also making sure that you protect space for other family activities.
yeah. I know I'm kind of conscious of time that we have overrun, and so I just wanted to wrap up really with the Vitiligo Society providing a slide, and so I'll leave it in the hands of Natalie and Abby if they'd like to share it now or at the end, because I am aware that you've got other guest speakers waiting, but would like to thank you all for your time this evening, and if you've got any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat.